Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. One of the most famous and influential people in the conservative movement in 2021 is named Charlie Kirk. He's the founder and the president of Turning Point USA. He is a profoundly effective organizer, but he's also an intellectual. He thinks about ideas, he cares about them, and some of his ideas have changed recently. We thought it'd be worth sitting down with him and asking him what he's thinking now. Charlie Kirk joins us. Charlie, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank
you.
So
this is not a formal category, but in my head, I'm trying to seek out and interview people who didn't complete college. Because I'm just interested in people who took a different path from the normally prescribed path. And I think you're the first person we've interviewed who didn't go to college at all.
That's right.
So I can tell you don't like talking about yourself, but just for the instruction of the rest of us, tell us about your journey to where you are now.
Yeah, it's an unusual path. I always thought I was going to go to college. The worst thing you could possibly do where I grew up was not go to college.
Where'd you
Drugs, suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah.
So like drugs, alcoholism, like we can deal with that. Like we have a playbook for that, kind of going missing for a couple days or going up to Lake Geneva and kind of going on a bender with your friends.
Right. Going out to Minnesota for rehab.
Of course. Fine. We've dealt with that before, but kind of a kid who's in the top 5% of your high school who did sports, was an Eagle Scout, not going to college, fire alarm.
Oh, so you did well in high school.
Yeah, I wasn't the first in class, but AP classes, and I was.
So you were on the college track.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was in the meetings with the high school counselors where it was not a matter of if I was going to college, it's what college was I going to, because almost every single metric that the school district used as a way to gauge success was how many kids are we getting into four universities.
Right.
And so the whole community that I grew up in was just programmed to believe that four-year university was the only way. It was the ticket to success. And so I wanted to go to West Point, and I didn't get in. Ended up being a really good thing that happened to me. That didn't happen to me, actually. And I just kind of told my parents, like, look, I'm going to take a gap year and try to figure out my place in this world. I don't want to go borrow $70,000 to go to some school that I really don't have very much connection to or passion about. And it's been about 9 gap years. And
so what did you do for your gap year? You didn't hike in Laos, obviously.
No, I didn't do that. Nor did I explore, the biodiversity of Somalia or whatever some of these kids do when they're given these, there's this idea of a gap year where you're supposed to explore the world. I didn't do that. I just told my parents, look, I have a deep passion for our country. I started the organization that, obviously I do all our work now through Turning Point USA with no money, no connections, and no idea what I was doing.
At what age?
18. Yeah.
Well, how did that come to you? Most 18-year-olds are not starting their own 501c3s, their own organizations.
I wish it was kind of like this moment where I said I was sitting under, the tree and the apple came down and I discovered the gravitational laws of, of the universe. It wasn't that simple. It was just, I just had a passion. I just started speaking locally at Republican groups and Tea Party groups. And I realized that my generation was being not correctly informed on these issues of our nation and our culture. And I've grown a lot on those issues over the last 5 years, and I really would love to explore that. But basically in 2012, when I started this, it was, especially in the suburbs of Chicago, it was, you must love Barack Obama or else, you're a terrible person. I always took exception to that. Had some great mentors and people that believed in me. Some of them as well. Foster Free's great guy, and he's terrific. And he kind of saw the vision, and it was kind of clumsy at first because I didn't really understand. I didn't know how to do payroll, let alone run an organization, let alone grow something. But I learned along the way and started to get a better grasp of these ideas. And, it was a great thing that I never went to college.
So the reason, I'll just be totally blunt with you. The reason I want to talk to you is not because you're obviously a great organizer. You're a very effective speaker. I've seen it a couple times. And you're a great fundraiser. Those are all kind of political skills, which I respect, but we see them a lot. What I didn't realize until recently was that you are an active thinker and you're really interested in ideas. I don't know how that went completely over my head, but it's true. We had this long, kind of amazing dinner together last month, and my view of you completely changed. So tell us about your intellectual journey.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, it's just a sincere way. Someone who covers politicians, I see a certain skill set, but always lacking from that skill set is like an interest in the ideas. But you have that.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. I started in the conservative movement when it was dominated by libertarianism.
Yes.
And I read everything. So I've always loved ideas, but I felt myself in this handcuff of abstractions. That everything would always go back to just some repeated dogma.
Yes.
So I read Hayek and Mises and Rothbard. I think there's some very interesting things we can glean from their literature. However, there was always this conclusion of this reversion to ideology. And the only way to beat an ideologue is with another ideologue. And so 2013, 14, 15, the conservative movement was knitted together very similarly as in the 1980s as being almost an anti-Soviet, anti-Obama conservative movement.
Yes.
We don't like the Soviets. We don't like Obama. We'll get the libertarians and conservatives and neocons in one room, and we can all agree that we need to get rid of Obama or we need to get rid of the Soviets. And then in 2015 and 2016, as we were trying to select a candidate, there was finally this robust discussion that, quite honestly, I was unprepared for, of what exactly does it mean to be a conservative? And this kind of balance between permanence and progression was something I never really thought deeply about. Are we just going to be managing progress as conservatives, or are we going to be able to say, no, there are some things that should not change? That we should, as Edmund Burke said, be very clear about this three-tied knot of those that came before us, the living, and those have yet to be born. And I never thought I don't want to say deeply, but I really never encountered these ideas in a way that was profound to me. And in 17, 18, and 19, as those ideas started...
You didn't, well, I suppose you did, because as you just said, you didn't really have to. None of us really had to, because conservatism was purely a reaction against these other movements. So there wasn't a need to kind of figure out what you were for. Yeah, and the people that dominated the conversation, now that I have realized, were either heavily influenced by corporate America that wanted the conservative movement to just revert to abstractions and ideology for the lack of interference from the state towards their kind of corporate tyranny, which I'd love to explore with you. Yes.
And this kind of thought also, it lends itself towards, not necessarily away from partisanship, but it gets towards a more nuanced and, dare I say, a more thoughtful conservative movement in the sense that we are unafraid to say, you know what, maybe I agree with Bernie Sanders' immigration policy when he used to talk about it in 2004. Maybe mass immigration shouldn't be the most important thing that conservatives should always stand for. And I believe, and Russell Kirk predicted this, that as soon as the Soviet Union fell, the conservative movement in America wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
And he predicted this almost to the date and time. So the Berlin Wall falls. And this is what I call the four horsemen of the 90s. And this is when I was born in 93. So all this was happening while I had basically no say about it, where the generation that did so well, the older baby boomers and kind of the George H.W. Bush, Irving Kristol generation,
right,
they were in the prime of their political career. And so what did they decide to do as soon as the Berlin Wall fell? And almost to the date, Russell Kirk was right. Mass immigration in 1990, George H.W. Bush signed in this compromise with Ted Kennedy to bring in millions of people, unrestricted, into our nation, of this great bargain of cheap labor and then cheap votes. So both sides kind of got a win out of that. 1994, Bill Clinton signs NAFTA because we decided it would be a good idea to deindustrialize the backbone of our nation. And then 1999, one that might surprise people, that as a conservative I think we should find disgusting, was the repeal of Glass-Steagall. Was when Bill Clinton went out of his way to pander to the financial services lobby that largely led to cheap money and I think the blurring of lines between commercial banking and investment banking. And then finally, China's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001.
Right.
And all four of those things, I believe, was the conservative movement or the people in charge chasing momentary pleasure and not preserving the good, with no commitment to permanence or to trying to pass something that has worked, that is moral and beautiful to my generation.
I completely agree. I was there for all of that. I was a conservative. I was a writer during all the moments you just mentioned. I missed all four of them, completely missed them. There was a sense that they were important. You could kind of feel that like things were about to change, but there was nobody other than Pat Buchanan and to some extent Ross Perot standing up and saying maybe this is a bad idea. And those two were attacked by me in part as crazy, as bigots or whatever. I mean, they really were kicked out of the conservative movement.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because this kind of neoliberal bipartisan consensus was really, I would say, in a clever fashion, protected by good, not somewhat good intentions, but also if you dare criticize us, you're a bad person.
Right.
So I remember being in 4th grade, and one of my classmates, who had more wisdom than I did, asked my teacher, "Hey, is it a good thing that everything's made in China?" 4th grade. And my teacher said yes. And there was almost this charitable explanation that if you care about the people of the world, then you're going to want all this plastic imported from Wuhan.
Right.
And as I look back to that moment, I realized that the people that actually had really bad intentions, that were designing just momentary corporate profit for no regard for the nation at all, so looking at America as a colony, not as a country, they swatted down any opposition by saying you're a bad person.
Yes, that's right.
And immediately going to virtue signaling, all signaling no virtue, and going to moralizing, and no sort of conversation was ever allowed to happen about this. And so what I think is really healthy, though, is that finally these ideas are back in the forefront. And you're right, Ross Perot did very well because he actually talked about the sucking noise of Mexico stealing our jobs. He talked about middle class work. He talked about the muscular class. Pat Buchanan did as well. And it wasn't until Donald Trump came on the scene that any of these ideas were given a fair hearing, in my opinion.
It struck me the other day that China is powerful because it has a manufacturing economy.
Of course.
Of course. It's so interesting, though. I mean, China's not beating us at the highest levels of tech. China's beating us because they make televisions and they make physical, tangible goods that we used to make.
Yes, and so there was this great bargain that was done. Bargain's even a terrible word for it. There was a deal. And the promise was, okay, we're going to just basically eliminate 15 million jobs almost instantaneously for the sake of bringing in a bunch of plastic so that you're going to be able to have more stuff that you really have no regard for. And so when I drive through these small towns, Tucker, and my wife, when I travel, it's kind of this running joke. I count in a 1 hour spread how many Dollar Generals and Family Dollars there are.
Yeah.
And for me, that might as well be a Chinese embassy. Yeah. So you get a dollar product that's going to fall apart in 6 months that you don't even remember you bought. But then what was the cost of that? And so in economics, we were always told that's the most important thing to order society. And I'm not saying economics are unimportant, but economics is a science. You can't really derive morality from it. And so when you only organize your society based on cost of goods, then you should ask yourself the question, well, what's the cost of the society? And so we had these macroeconomics economists organize our society saying that the importation of goods and making nothing domestically will actually make us richer. So now it's a question, as we're in 2021, is that really the case? And the answer is absolutely no. Families are decaying, church attendance is down, opioid use is up, alcoholism is up. And what used to be the defining quality of America, which is not Wall Street or Hollywood or any of those that nonsense. No, it was the ability that we had people earning $15 to $20 an hour, a living wage at the time, being able to raise a family of 4 to 5 children, if they so choose, and they made stuff with their hands, so they actually saw the reward at their work.
Right.
So now we have an overemphasis on the technological economy, an overemphasis on the information economy, and basically it's this massive labor arbitrage that I think has made us poor, not just economically, but it's made us poor spiritually, it's made us poor culturally.
Probably should have started this way, but I'm going to move a couple paragraphs back and ask you, what are the things that conservatism in 2021 should be defending? What is the point of a conservative movement?
I think a transcendent order is critical.
A transcendent order.
Yeah, and I didn't come up with it. That's Russell Kirk's words, so I have no connection, but I do share a last name, so I'm somewhat partial. And Edmund Burke talked about this before, which is that we're here for a purpose. And that, I'm a religious person, and I believe that our rights are given to us from a creator, and that we're made in his image. That's not to say that Atheists have no place in the conservative movement, or the a-religious do. But I don't think society is sustainable without things that anchor us to the true purpose of why we're here. And the second of which then is the family. Now, mind you, I skipped over the individual because I think an overemphasis on individualism has been very unhealthy for conservatism. I think that individualism has its purpose in Lockean philosophy, but I also think there's excesses. So the family is, in my opinion, the one institution that we can point to that has stood the test of time next to maybe religion.
Yeah.
And what we've done through our economics and through our school system and through college and through our public policy decisions, we have basically said the family is either optional or an annoyance, or maybe if you want to build a family, you can have children and the state will raise your children for you. And I think we're starting to see the limitations of that kind of postmodern vision of whatever the family should be. And so I think as conservatives, we should then say we stand for transcendent order, for strong and robust and large families, and Americans being born in our nation, reversing the trend of a declining American birth rate, and then community. That's a word that conservatives don't like to talk about because it kind of feels almost collectivistic, right? Anything that has commune or community, we tend to say, oh, no, we don't like that. I'm just going to be my own person, and I'm going to be driven by ambition solely and completely. Well, I think that there's this kind of yearning, and if I could just do a side note here, one of the reasons why I think that we're about to live through something rather significant is the number one piece of feedback I receive from smart people is this nonstop repetition of nostalgia. And I think when...
What does that mean?
Things used to be better 10 years ago. Things used to be better 20 years ago.
You hear people say that.
All the time.
Yeah.
And there's almost this bipartisan agreement, no matter who you talk to, that things were better before. And nostalgia is a natural thing for human beings to demand, right? Because there's always this kind of idea of like my memories were best. But when it's so repeated, when it's so in front of us, that should be a fire alarm. That maybe modernity has its limitations, and maybe we need things that we need to anchor ourselves to.
Right.
And I think that conservatives should also be unafraid to defend the ancient and the beautiful and the wonder. And what is beauty? I mean, have we even had that conversation as conservatives lately? Of course not. Beauty is that which is perfected in being and glorifies the good. And you don't find many politicians that ever talk about these things because it won't get them reelected, or maybe they haven't thought about it. I don't know. But you look, for example, and I know you and I share a passion about art, which is not exactly something that conservatives care much about. I joke around the largest open art exhibit for postmodernism in San Francisco. Because everything you see on the streets of San Francisco 20 years ago was in an art exhibit. Chaos, disorder, and the destruction of purpose.
Yeah.
It's now just bled over into the streets. And so conservatives should be unafraid to say that we want to pursue the good. We want...
So when you see a junkie on the sidewalk on Market Street lying in a puddle of his own urine, that's a kind of art installation.
I mean, I think back to the 1960s when a pile of excrement was submitted as art.
Right.
In some sort of postmodern museum in Paris or New York, and the ruling class fawned over that. Or I think of the signed urinal in the 1920s.
That's right.
I think art is a...
Marcel Duchamp, the beginning of Dada.
Precisely.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So you got to kind of wonder then why... I mean, let's just take it to a really tangible level. You mentioned Dollar General.
Yes.
The ubiquitous dollar store, the marker of rural poverty, right, is the dollar store, I would say. You got to wonder why conservatives haven't fought back against that. Like even at the level of commercial real estate, you know, a dollar store is ugly. It sells ugly products. It is, of course, a parasite on rural sadness, right?
Totally.
Right. The percentage of people at the dollar store who are on some kind of federal or state aid is probably overwhelming. So, like, why would you be for that? Why, if you live in a community and someone says, I want to build a dollar store, like on the main drag, why wouldn't you say, no, you can't?
Well, because I think that...
I don't think a conservative would ever say that.
And I think they will, because conversations like this have finally been liberated from the false framework that all of our discussions were taking place, where we had this, like, newspeak simulation that we've been operating in. Like, no, I love corporate growth at all times. Really, do you? You want every single human being to go to a Dollar General and a Family Dollar so that the ruling class can have 6 yachts in Kennebunkport? I think that's a bad bargain. bad deal. But let me tell you this. Here's why. I think that we're stuck in the muscle memory of the conversations of the 90s and early 2000s. So you know who used to say that Dollar General and Family Dollar used to be bad? It was the Democrats.
Yeah, I know.
So I was just recently in Whitefish, Montana. I love Whitefish, Montana.
Me too.
So I was just exiting Whitefish, Montana, and my driver, and I pointed, I said, oh, there's a Starbucks. She said, you know what's unique about that Starbucks? I said, what? She said, there's the county line. We don't let corporate in Whitefish, Montana. I said, oh, that's why I love it here.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because this is why I have a soft spot for environmentalists. I don't like their conclusions. I don't like their war on energy. But I think it's actually admirable to want to preserve something.
Of course. I agree.
I think that's beautiful, that something works. You want your children to enjoy it as you do. You want permanence, not progression for the sake of progression, as Lord Falkland would say. If it's not necessary to change, it's necessary not to change. That this cult of progress is actually maddening. It creates this fanaticism of chaos, in my personal opinion, because I think human beings need permanence to anchor us. But one of the reasons why conservatives haven't rejected that is the muscle memory of discussions of past. We need to break ourselves out of that. I mean, these conversations really have an impact. And number two, there is this belief in conservatism that we don't want to be anti-development. And I'm not really sure where this came from. The only explanation I have is the over-excess or indulgence in individualism and kind of this urbanization push. That
maybe if you take a lot of money from developers, you're for development.
I think that's probably right. And so, for example, I'm not running for anything, so I'm free.
Yeah.
So I think we should have height limitations on buildings in our country.
Well, of course.
I think the higher the buildings go, the less you are to own, to be actually in contact with the land that we should care about. And so there's a direct correlation with how high the buildings are and how little you love your country. It's the tragedy of the commons.
I completely agree with that. How about this, just as a kind of framework going forward? If it's ugly and dehumanizing, we're against it.
Yeah, and I think we have to be clear of what is ugly. And that's and what is beautiful. And so I do this with college kids all the time because they never have these conversations, right? They're just kind of stuck in this oppressor-oppressed, really kind of boring debate.
Very boring.
And it's maddening, and it creates deeply unhappy activists, which is exactly what our universities
and dumb
create.
People, by the way.
Correct. And so then conservatives play into this kind of oppressor-oppressed thing by not being able to deal with the guilt that they feel because they went to these universities.
Right.
I think guilt is the inability to deal with guilt, I think, is one of the larger driving forces in politics that no one wants to talk about.
I agree with that.
White guilt, corporate guilt, wealth guilt, unearned guilt. And so, however, what is the...
I'm sorry, that's such an interesting point. It's quickly flesh it out. Why does no one want to... I think you're absolutely right. It's taken the place of theology.
Totally.
Right? So a society without meaning will find meaning, and we found it in expiating our own guilt. But why will no one talk about that?
So I'm going to talk about the mechanics of Christianity, not what I believe is the divinity, because I do believe in the inerrancy of Scripture, and Jesus was a real person and died and rose from the... I'm going to talk about the mechanics of Christianity for a second, because we don't talk about this enough. A true Christian, after they go through either a church service or a deep reading of the Scriptures, I'm more evangelical in nature, you're freed from that guilt. Whatever guilt that might be, of wronging your neighbor or being of a certain complexion that society says you shouldn't be, because you go straight to the source of your Creator. Right. And so that's the mechanics of Christianity that have worked so well for the last couple thousand years, that you don't owe some penance to society because of the melanin content in your skin. So you remove the mechanics of Christianity, and every I don't want to say sect, but that's probably the right word, but every different denomination of Christianity has a different way to deal with this, right? So in Catholicism, it would be the taking of the Eucharist. Right. In the evangelical tradition, it would be worship, right? And so that's why those of us that are more in the evangelical world, 30 minutes of worship and being filled with the Holy Spirit and deeply reading the Scriptures will free us of any sort of earthly or material wrongdoing that we might have done in the last week. And then, of course, atoning to your neighbor, going to your neighbor and saying, you know what, I wronged you. Will you forgive me? Right. Then all of a sudden, you're kind of freed of that, whatever you might have done. There's a formal process for offloading your guilt. Totally. So you don't need to offload it onto the society at large. Yes. And so, again, this is something I've done a lot of writing about, and I'm just beginning to articulate, because I try to think a couple months before I say something out loud, which I really do believe that guilt is the driver of our politics right now.
Yes, I agree with that.
Of Republicans that introduce these ridiculous police reform bills because they feel guilty because they don't know how to deal with the accusations being thrown at them by the left, or the left that has no sort of belief in a transcendent order or the good or the beautiful. They offload their guilt through massive public policy measures, activism, the confiscation of wealth, and the elimination of private property. And so we as conservatives need to be very clear of what is beautiful. And even the most ardent atheist, I believe in small d democracy of beautiful. And I just kind of chuckle because there's a reason why everyone huddles on Santa Monica Beach 10 minutes before the sunset. Because there's an agreement that there's beauty in that.
Right, that's right.
Even the most fervent atheist, I mean, Christopher Hitchens would go and see that sunset.
Of course.
And so therefore, if there is an agreement that mountains and maybe untouched nature is beautiful, then there must be some order of the good. There has to be. And thankfully, there's been abundant amount of scholarship that's been done on this topic. And I think conservatives should be unafraid to talk about this.
I couldn't agree more. Everyone loves a puppy.
Of course.
Puppy, you look at a puppy's face, it's beautiful. Who knows why? But
Yes.
I mean, it's actually not that much. I think you're exactly right. Debate about what is beautiful.
Yeah, and what is courage, right? So it's not being rash, and it's not being shy, and you can't be courageous unless you're afraid. But it's also standing up for those that can't stand up for themselves, or taking clear stances of when you might lose something.
It's just so interesting, the beauty thing, though. If you live in a world, I decided a few years ago I don't want to be around ugly, and I don't want to live in an ugly world because it's not good for you. So it's
really bad for your soul.
It is bad for your soul, and I don't do it anymore. But I've noticed that every time we do a segment on architecture, specifically, I'm interested in architecture just because...
My dad's an architect.
Oh, okay. Well,
and
good.
he agrees completely with your worldview on this.
Yeah, I mean, I live in America. I want to live around buildings that sort of elevate the landscape, that are tied in some sense to nature, that, make you cheerful and not despondent. I mean, just basic stuff. Every time we do a segment on that, the response is like, you're a Nazi! Really? What, because I don't like brutalism? Because I don't like concrete crap? I just want something pretty. In other words, they're hyper-aggressive about aesthetics. Hyper-aggressive.
Which means we're right over the
Exactly.
target.
Exactly. So why aren't conservatives every bit as aggressive back? Like, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to build a dollar store in my town. Sorry.
And by
the way, when they tried to cut the sequoias in Northern California in the 1980s, a radical environmental activist called Julia Butterfly Hill climbed to the top of one of them and said, you're not cutting down the redwood, sorry, because I love this tree. Why don't conservatives just kind of camp out on the building site of the next dollar store and say, I'm sorry, I'm not moving?
They will. I'm actually optimistic.
I hope they do.
They will. They're still trying to figure this all out, Tucker, because they're stuck in this kind of this I want to call it theater. I will call it theater of you receive money from a certain group of people and you oppose socialism and you oppose whatever the Democrats are doing. But then it's okay if there's Dollar General. It's okay that we have a 95-foot building, a 95-story building in Syracuse or, whatever town that they might represent. And this goes to what conservatism actually is, which I just have to say our leaders and many of the politicians haven't really figured this out. And that's okay. They will. That's the space you and I are in. That's why I do 2 podcasts a day and why our radio show is growing and why your show is flourishing, because there's depth to this conversation that, at least in the conservative movement I grew up in, none of this existed.
Yeah.
And this kind of discourse and this dialogue and this wrestling with these ideas. But I agree. I think that conservatives need to then they need to apply their agreement into action, which is the space that I basically live in, right? Which is not just, one of my favorite quotes is, I try not to just stare at the heavens because I'm afraid I'm going to fall in a well, right? If the overemphasis on just the ideas and not the application, then we just become a bunch of professors and academics, the philosopher kings that I really have a great deal of repulsion for, right? And so then it's like, okay,
because they're not good at their jobs.
Well, they're really bad at their jobs, and they're not even exposing kids to any of this stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And they also generally hate the country that
they
they're
do.
in.
I'm not against philosopher kings as a category. I'm just against bad ones, and we have some bad ones.
We have the worst.
So, I want to read you a couple tweets you sent recently, and I want to evaluate these against the backdrop of, your job, which is, I think you're probably the biggest conservative organizer in the country. Is that fair to say? I don't know a bigger one.
I mean, I'm sure there's someone bigger, but
I don't think there is. And you raise a ton of money. And of course, most money comes from rich people. So when you tweet something like this, and I'm quoting, corporations are no friends to America. They are nothing more than massive college campuses with shareholders. Conservatives and Republicans should act accordingly. That was last month. So, you raise your money from people who presumably started corporations or work in them or benefit from them, shareholders of them. How does that go over?
Pretty well. I mean, our funding base at Turning Point is a lot of entrepreneurs, Midwestern-based, mid-sized businesses, 100 to 600 employees, done well. But even the donors that aren't in that category, some of them dropped off because I said that. I said, okay, that's fine. And our donor base at Turning Point's expanding through small dollar donations significantly. But Tucker, I'm kind of in a place where I really don't care. And I'm going to keep on saying things that are true. And then however the funding for our organization kind of plays out, so be it. I will say this, though, Tucker, that the donors to our organization are very concerned that there is this corporatist tyranny that is seeping into our country that does not reflect their viewpoint or their values, and they want something done about that.
Yeah.
And so it goes over rather positively.
So you said you can say this because you don't care, and I am totally convinced that's the key to freedom.
Yes.
Emancipate yourself from mental slavery, as Bob Marley said. And you can't emancipate yourself from it until you decide that the attacks, the bad faith attacks from people who hate you, have no power. Like, you have the key to that within yourself. I think this is true for all of us. So I think it's essential for people not to care about the attacks of people who have
totally agree.
No interest in them or the truth or even the meaning of words. How did you get to that? How did you get to not caring?
That's a really good question. It did come with the more I understand these ideas and the more I've thought about them and the more that I have decided where I am ordered in the nation. For example, my relationship with my wife matters a lot more than whatever, feedback I might receive from someone that might have given me money 5 years ago. It's way more important, right? Or my relationship with my creator. And so then properly ordering yourself, I think, is a very important thing.
Properly ordering yourself, creating a hierarchy of what's important in your life.
Yes. And I don't think enough people do that.
So tell me your order.
Well, first and foremost, my relationship with my creator.
Right.
With my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And then my relationship with my wife.
Yes.
And then my relationship with my nuclear family, my parents.
Yes.
And those that are in my kin, or my little platoon, if you will. Then my friends.
Yes.
And then from there, my profession or my work.
Where's Twitter on this list?
Very low. I actually deleted Twitter from my phone.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh,
I text my team my tweets. I deleted all social media. I think technology is destroying our humanity. And when I mean deleted social media, I didn't delete my accounts. I just deleted it from my phone. I let my team deal with it. I send them stuff to do.
Yeah. I don't have my Twitter password. And so, yes, I agree with you. So you just got married and you went on your honeymoon and you wrote what I thought was kind of a beautiful piece about getting away from technology for the week or 10 days you were abroad. What was that like?
Liberating.
So what did you do when you say you got away from technology? Like, be specific.
Phone off, handed it to my team, no computer, no news cycle, nothing.
For how long?
10 days.
So I don't know anyone who's done that in the last decade. I actually don't think I know a person who's done that.
I know one person. Dave Rubin does it every August.
Does he really? Good for Dave Rubin.
And that would be it.
So what happened?
Well, so first 48 hours, because I'm so used to, constantly picking that device, I kind of had to reorient myself in the natural world. But then after about 3 days, I realized that the smooth screen, as I call it, this little digital pacifier that we have around us, it's not just accelerating pre-existing behavior, it's creating new behavior altogether, which is something I'd love to explore with you. For example, At the innovation of the automobile, it was not designed to be addictive. It was designed to be useful. The iPhone in some ways was designed to be useful, but it was more designed to be addictive. Their entire model is, how do I manipulate your neuroscience so that you stare at the screen more? That's their obsession. They hire the premier neuroscientists in the world to fly into Menlo Park to Apple's headquarters, where they treat 6-year-olds like lab rats so that they can stare at their screen more. So on our honeymoon, I started to realize that this time I was spending with my wife, it was incredibly exclusive in the sense I looked to my right and everyone was texting and tweeting and Snapchatting where they were. I looked to my left, I said, no one gets to share this with me. It's ours. And it's always going to be ours. And the memories will always be within our soul and our spirit. Why would I want to take all these social media people along to my honeymoon with me? Their needs, their wants, their concerns, their urgent requests. That's sort of irrational. And
creepy.
Very creepy.
Yeah.
And so we saw this beautiful sunset in the Caribbean, and my wife and I were just enjoying every moment of it. The way the sun reflected off the water, the clouds that just danced across the sky. It was as beautiful as beauty gets, right? It's something that almost God spent extra time. This is a master stroke on the sky. And I looked to my right and looked to my left, and their eyes were not looking at the wonder around them, but down to the needs, wants, and concerns of some narcissist in New York City that wanted their attention. There's something deeply unhealthy about that.
So you're 27, you're a year older than my oldest child, weirdly. And so that means you've lived your whole adult life and part of your childhood with this technology.
That's correct.
When was the last time that you had 10 days without a screen?
When I was in high school. And I tell parents all the time, if you want to give the greatest gift to your child, don't give them a smartphone when they're in high school.
High school? I mean, but nobody waits till high school.
Well, I think 18. I think that they're more dangerous than AR-15s.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Completely.
I think we should treat this stuff like nuclear weaponry.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time shooting the AR-15. I've never, no bad effects at all.
No, but I say that intentionally because the left treats AR-15s like they're the most.
Oh, it's a great rifle, actually.
It's terrific.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
Love Armalite. But the point is that I think the phone is doing much more damage than AR-15s ever will.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the average family, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but gives some kind of smartphone or device, iPad, to kids like in 4th grade. So tell me about your brain and how you noticed more around you. You were more fully in the moment without the distraction of the screen. But as you noted, there's something about spending half your day staring into the screen that changes the way you think. Did you find yourself thinking a little differently?
More clearly.
More clearly.
And deeply. And there's a cloudiness that comes in when you're always staring into the portal. There's an inability to connect one thought to the other. It's always this kind of interrupted, immediate dinging and pinging and flashing in front of you. It's designed that way, by the way. It's designed to always be pushing towards you, as if you're just going to play the slot machine. Come on, maybe I'll get a text message that will make me feel good. Maybe I'll get an Instagram like that will make you feel good. So we have a lot of idle time as human beings. I noticed this on my honeymoon. Sometimes, I might be going to the restroom, just walking the property. I did something that I hadn't done since I was in high school. Just looked at the world around me.
Yeah. Looked
at other human beings. Just thought about what I believe and why I believe it. And I had the belief before I went on the honeymoon. I didn't just do this as a social experiment, let me be clear. I did this because nothing is more important outside of my relationship with my creator and my savior than my relationship with my wife. And so, absent something that is a 5-alarm fire, the phones don't. Right? So that was the kind of the properly ordering part. But I believe firmly that these devices are destroying our humanity. And I also believe that technology breeds tyranny, which is something that conservatives need to talk more about.
So you can't really be free if you possess an iPhone. I mean, the phone is, of course, tracking you. It's listening to you. Any conversation you have can be monitored. I mean, it used to be, this sounded like Alex Jones stuff, who turned out to be completely right, by the way. No one says that, but it's true. But that's all actually happening. You can test it on your phone. So as long as you're dependent on the phone, you're not really capable of being free, are you?
Well, I don't want to say that there's not anyone that could probably master the device, but that's a general rule. And look, let me say this, that conservatives love citing Orwell. So I reread 1984 on my honeymoon in like literally 5 hours. And I blitzed through it because I was realizing things that I did not realize about the book that were so obvious there. And I think Orwell was a prophet in some sense. And there's a couple main points that I think conservatives miss, which is the whole book is premised on the idea of ubiquitous technology. The whole book.
I don't remember that.
Well, think about it. I mean, a Big Brother in every room, the telescreen in every single room.
Yeah.
The capacity to surveil and control is made easier thanks to technology. And so that's the overarching unspoken takeaway from the book, is that Orwell did not write 1984 in 1284. That tyranny would not have been possible. And so for a kind of thought exercise, what would Napoleon have done if he had the technology at his disposal? And also something I think that is completely missed on the scholarship on the conservative side is, so why do you think that the worst death tolls you've ever seen were in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s? Well, they say the rise of collectivism, despotism, and authoritarianism and totalitarianism. I agree with all of that. It's also technology that could kill more people quicker.
Right.
They could surveil people. They could organize you. And so if we as conservatives become these progressive conservatives that are always just apologizing for technology's sake and never talking about the alienation and the potential introduction for tyranny, I find that repulsive.
Where do you think this is going?
I try not to be solely in the predictive business. I can tell you where I think it's going. So here's the question that is, and I don't think anyone's really said it like this. Was 2016 a tremor, an earthquake, or an aftershock? Meaning, was it something before something? When Donald Trump got elected, I mean.
Yes.
Was it an earthquake, which is what it's obviously called, or was it an aftershock? I think it's a tremor. I think what we're living through is a 10-year-long tremor of something that's about to happen. I mean, a tremor meaning something that happens before an earthquake,
yes.
Just to kind of give the geological explanation. I think that when historians write this, they'll look at that as the beginning, not the event, of a decade-long reckoning with this kind of pocket technology, the surveillance state, corporate dominance, postmodern secularism, all these different factors putting together. So where is this going? I don't know, but I do know that there is a restlessness among decent people of what to do next. Where is my place in this world? Do I have to always be a slave to these devices? And so, yeah, there's probably going to be a little bit of upheaval because of that.
It feels that way. So you are, among other things, effectively an activist. You mobilize people to do things.
Yes.
So give us some examples. You said decent people are wondering what they can do to fight back against the megalith, whatever this is.
Yeah, the Leviathan, whatever it is.
The forces of repression that are changing the country too fast in the wrong direction. So give us
progress for progress' sake.
Small bore examples that are accessible to the average person that like you can do to make the country better, to make your family safer, to make the world a happier place.
Well, one thing that we're heavily involved in at Turning Point right now is encouraging people to get involved in school board activism.
Yeah.
You're starting to see this pop up organically, and obviously we're in the education space, and so this is something that is very applicable. But we have just decided to allow the school boards to be completely run by these kind of sociopathic, narcissistic activists for so long. So
some of them don't even have kids.
No, that's well, right. So they look at themselves as contributing to this revolution, the long march for the institutions.
Right. It used to be like the school board was busybody moms, you know, and maybe they were kind of annoying, but they were sort of vested in the schools. Their kids went there.
Well, they materially had a reason.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And so that's one thing. And the other thing is this, which is
so like
running for school board, being aware of your school board, FOIAing your school board, showing up to them, telling your neighbors and your friends and it's kind of this idea of local. And I think that we're over fixated on Congress, which I am less interested in that than I ever have been in my life, because it's the same sort of just speech and then bipartisan consensus to bring more people into the country and bring more plastic and then go declare war on some sovereign country. Right? It's just no matter what, that just ends up being the output, right?
So And it also feels, I couldn't agree with you more, of course, and it's frustrating as hell, but it also feels like Congress, this is another sign that democracy itself is withering, which obviously it is. The average person has less control over his life than ever before. Congress, as the most democratic body, the legislative body, seems way less relevant than it ever has.
That's right. And
less powerful.
In some ways, that's a good thing. In some ways, yeah, I guess it's probably a good thing. I mean, they're trying to do some very dangerous things that would actually disenfranchise localities.
Right.
So that's the real danger. But I'm actually I'm an optimist, Tucker. I think that self-sovereignty and determination is inevitable. I mean, in 1945, there were 55 countries in the world. There's well over 230. The trend is micro-slicing yourself into a smaller way to govern yourself because you think that you have a certain custom or language.
If there were 55 countries at the end of the Second World War?
That's according to Nigel Farage. So I'll have to triple check that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but let's pretend it's 100.
Right.
Let's just, for argument's sake. Because I never want to say anything that's untrue, but he just said that yesterday on my podcast, and it struck me as so interesting. And it's probably true when you think about it, because it's, the times of Churchill, and they had a heavy dominance
in
India and Southern Africa, right? So
that's
exactly
probably right. India became three countries, right? India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
That's right. So, and Churchill never thought India could work, and we'll see if it does. But the trend is actually towards less global totalitarianism, not more. The trend is that northern Greece is now, I think it's like northern Macedonia, whatever it is.
Right.
Which is people splicing themselves, which I think is a healthy thing, saying that we can govern ourselves in a better way than it's currently being done. The European project is withering at the vine, and it was an awful idea from the beginning. There are separatist movements happening, which are always demonized by the kind of smear merchants that run our communication channels in our country. So I actually think it's inevitable that people are going to want to grasp things they can control, things that they're familiar with, things that they see. And obviously the critique that is given to us is like, oh, you just want to have, something based on racial identity. We should reject that. Nothing we're saying is based on any of that.
Of course not.
I mean,
but they'll call you, look, if you do something they don't like, you're a racist. I remember the first time someone called me a racist, I was really shocked and horrified by it, because that's an awful thing to be. And it took me years to realize it has no meaning. They don't mean it. They don't care. They are racists by definition. About the sovereignty and people sort of moving to places with like-minded people, the governor of Florida recently, Rick DeSantis, described Florida as West Berlin, as like the free sector of the country. Is that kind of what you're seeing within our borders?
Yeah, we're already seeing the movement of states, I think, is the harbinger of the trend to come. And so where this plays out, we don't know. That's just guessing. I don't like guessing, but an educated guess would be this trend is always only going to continue. And this is a provocative thing to say, but I'll say because it's true. Outside of a unified currency, what do people like us have in common with people in Brooklyn and San Francisco? Very little. Now, not to say we should break up the United States. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just asking a question that is true. And if you don't have those ties that bind you together, and they reject almost everything that we've talked about, which is preserving ancestral traditions and the beautiful and the good and rooting yourself to permanence and rejecting for progress' sake, then who knows how that's going to shake out. But yeah, I think that what Ron DeSantis said is probably very true.
How can you live with people with whom you have nothing in common and with whom you're at odds over the basic questions? I mean, that's kind of...
And the ironic thing is our leaders created this.
I know.
Which is they could have, after the Soviet Union fell, not sought momentary pleasure and corporate dominance, but said, you know what, we beat the Soviet Union largely because we won the theological debate, which really is what the Soviet Union versus the United States was all about.
Yeah. And we were an effective industrial power.
Of course.
We made more and better stuff.
Yes. And we had factories that were producing steel in Ohio, and we could turn around an aircraft carrier in a month. I mean, it was the envy of the world. And so then our leaders, Ted Kennedy, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, through those kind of 4 public policy decisions that we talked about, completely reversed course. I think we're just finally realizing the consequences of that almost 20 to 30 years later.
So you feel hopeful?
I'm optimistic, of course.
You're 27. This is my last question for you, Charlie Kirk. You're 27. you're a living advertisement for skipping college, I will say, for a gap year that extends.
That's my next book, by the way.
Good.
Which is encouraging people not to go to college.
I've tried it with my own 4 children. Hasn't worked yet. But anyway, so you've done all this stuff. You've evolved as smart people do. Smart people derive their views from watching the world around them empirically, and you have done that, and I think it's a sign of wisdom. So, where are you going to be in 20 years?
Hopefully, happy and cheerful and with a big family. That's what matters.
Do you want to run?
No, I don't. No,
you're around politicians all the time. You don't want to be one.
Few of them have joy.
Yeah,
and they're never content with where they're at. It's always the next thing, the next office. And it's just kind of a busybody exercise in DC or whatever. I find joy in hosting my radio show, in speaking on college campuses, and doing our podcasts, and being able to take 2 hours just to read a good book. That's kind of who we are as people. And I think that's an important thing that we shouldn't lose. And so who knows where I'll be, but hopefully I'll be happy and joyful and learning something new every single day.
So if you could isolate the source of your joy in your work, you've already spoken of your family and your relationship to God, but as a professional matter, what brings you joy in what you do day to day?
The highest level of joy or of purpose is when I get thousands of emails or people come up to me, they said, Charlie, you've helped make sense, you've helped clarify my understanding of this particular issue. Thank you. That's the best thing I could possibly hear, is that the work that I am doing, the scholarship I'm trying to endeavor on, the ideas I'm trying to distill and synthesize are making thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, and God willing, millions of people better understand how they fit in this entire political discourse or this cultural conversation. And then, of course, the thing that also gives me great joy is the conversion stories.
Yeah.
Is the people that say, I was, a left-wing socialist, and now I'm a social conservative. And I still believe some of the stuff on economics on the left, but I think that we need to preserve order and this idea of the American nation. It's a great thing to hear.
You thought about, the universities are obviously not sustainable in their current form. They just don't, they don't serve a purpose.
Massive subsidy.
They're, the wellspring of all poison, really, I would say, in this country. So you can't imagine they're going to exist. Is Bowdoin really going to still, be operating in 20? No,
Wellesley.
Yeah. I hope not. So why wouldn't you work to replace that? You like to teach, you said.
That's a very heavy endeavor. Maybe. There's some good schools. Hillsdale does a great job amongst others, but maybe that's not the model that we should encourage. I don't know. Maybe, liberal arts education is very important. I would argue that a good, robust diet of easy to understand, digestible ideas with muscular work is probably more important than just putting 20 million people a year into kind of this factory of indebtedness and lack of purpose, where only 57% of the people that go to college graduate and they're borrowing money they don't have to study things that don't matter, to find jobs that don't exist. So we're filled with awful ideas and sent back into the world. So, maybe there's going to be a place for that. But I also, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about kind of indicting college is that you're just not allowed to talk about it. And almost everyone tap dances around it, which I think is the most exciting of ideas to talk.
Well, maybe that's the answer to the question. The real joy comes from telling the truth when you're not allowed.
That's true. And I will say that. Someone said, Charlie, what does success look like in 5 years? I say, if I can decline college enrollment by 10%, I will have done my job.
Charlie Kirk, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So much for coming on. Your story was so significant because it seemed like the beginning of a trend where political prosecutors send the message that you're not allowed to defend yourself no matter how crazy and chaotic and dangerous the country becomes. Don't take up arms to defend your property, your family, your own life. And I think it's fair to say it was the beginning of a trend, no?
Well, it was. And, this is not accidental, and it's not a result of inadvertence or incompetence. What's our right to defend ourselves? It's a God-given right. It's a basic human right. Well, the powers that be that want to destroy our government, want to destroy our freedoms, and want to destroy our culture, they can't tolerate the concept of there being a power greater than government. They have to do away with your God-given rights, all your rights and leave you with nothing but government-granted privileges that can be revoked at a moment's notice. I mean,
That's exactly
look at what's
right.
going on. We've got a vice president of the United States who encouraged the riots, said the riots are proper, they should continue, bailed people out of jail so they can riot the next day. We got a government that encourages crime and then discourages law enforcement by defunding the police and these George Soros prosecutors like I have here in St. Louis. And then what do the people do? If there's rampant crime and the police won't enforce the law and the prosecutors won't prosecute the criminals, people have to defend themselves. So then what? That same government then criminalizes self-defense and throws you in jail. Now, you know, it wasn't cheap to defend ourselves. And then to add insult to injury, our Bar Association required us to do 100 hours each of pro bono legal services. So that's 200 hours of our time. That's about $150,000 fine right there. But we can handle that. But think about that poor George Allen Kelly down in Texas, 73-year-old man with $1 million bond for doing nothing more than defending himself. The whole purpose of all this is to strip our rights away, strip away our God-given freedoms, and give absolute control to the government. Criminalize self-defense and glorify the government.
Yeah. So they start a crime wave and then demand you give up your guns. Yeah, no thanks. No thanks. Mark Golowski, great to see you. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So in this weird inverted world that we're living in, the criminals are actually the victims. So who are the criminals? Well, obviously, sincere Christians. They're the real problems. Sincere Christians in the middle class, boy, they're dangerous. And the FBI, it's hard to believe this, doubtless there are decent FBI agents, but the FBI as an organization has joined in the hunt for Christians, and we have proof of it. The FBI tried to manufacture crimes against sincere Catholics. The FBI's Richmond field office recently published an internal document promising to punish, quote, radical traditionalist Catholics and their ideology. Now, just to make something completely clear, the Bill of Rights prohibits the government from weighing in on sectarian or religious questions. They don't get to decide whether your religion is good or bad. They have to be agnostic on it. But the FBI has decided if you're too sincere about Catholicism, you're a criminal. The document cites obvious lies from the fascist and dishonest Southern Poverty Law Center several times. Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's hard to believe this is even real. This is one of those. What was your reaction when you saw this?
Well, my reaction is predictable. I mean, I'm a Catholic, number one, and I think it's appalling. It's one of those things that when the government has gotten to the point where you talked about our Second Amendment rights, and those defend our First Amendment rights to practice our religion, particularly the way that we want to. I'm friends with people who love the Latin Mass. I grew up in a traditional school where I actually learned Latin in 5th and 6th grade and all the way through high school. And it doesn't seem reasonable, but it is the state of the FBI at this point that they are so desperate to find white supremacists that they're going to look at the Catholic Church. But I think if we're realistic about it, what they're doing is they have found a gateway in what they think is fringe Catholicism in order to move into Christians in general and declare them to be the actual the criminals in this country or the potential terrorists. And that's what I think we're seeing. Because the whole document basically is written from the perspective of somebody who thinks that there are significant abortion rights that need to be defended and also an LGBTQ agenda that has to be pushed down the American people's throats. And those are antithetical to Catholicism. So it's pretty easy. It's an open door into Christians in this country, which is pretty much all the country.
Well, yeah, and also Orthodox Judaism and Islam and Mormonism. I mean, they're right. And did no one in the FBI say, whoa, wait a second. It's not our job to decide which is a better religion and criminalize people's religious belief. Did anyone in your world within the Bureau say that?
Well, obviously, the whistleblower who brought it to me. So I'm in contact with a number of people who work in the FBI and have the same values that probably you and I do. And so, you know, they brought it to me. One of them brought it to me and said, this is a problem. And this person is not a Catholic. But he or she stated the very simple statement, which is that if they're going to go after radical traditional Catholics, then radical traditional Baptists are next, and radical traditional evangelicals, and anybody else that espouses essentially what is radical, which is just a Christian faith. And that is dangerous, apparently, in this country.
Well, I'm not Catholic either. I'd be defending the Scientologists or anybody else. Like, you can't do this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you're bringing this to the public. Kyle Serafin, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So here's a completely bizarre story, and we're not making any claims about it other than noting it. 2 Republican politicians in one state assassinated in the span of a week. What is that? Plus, John Fetterman has been a senator for just a few weeks. Some thought, well, maybe he wasn't up for the job. He was just rushed to the hospital. Sad, but also you wonder what is going on. That's next. Two days ago, one of the most famous reporters in American history, a registered Democrat, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, wrote a piece proving, we believe proving, that the Biden administration blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipelines, the largest energy pipelines in Europe, thereby tanking the European economy, and lied about it. He showed exactly how it happened. Probably the biggest story of the year. What's bigger than that? We checked today, and no one has covered it. CNN, MSNBC devoted precisely 0 words to it. New York Times, Washington Post ignored it. Really? Why? We're not going to ignore it. More updates later. So you've heard a lot about attacks on democracy, but you haven't heard a lot about 2 New Jersey Republican office holders who've been assassinated in just 1 week. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, it's interesting that New Jersey police appear to have very little information about the shootings themselves, and yet they have still come to a number of conclusions. So here's what we know. On Wednesday of last week, 30-year-old Eunice Dwumfor, a council member in Sayreville, New Jersey, was found shortly after 7 p.m. shot to death inside her car. On Wednesday of this week, 50 miles away, shortly after 7 a.m., 51-year-old Russell Heller, a Milford, New Jersey council member, was found shot to death in his car in the parking lot of PSE&G Energy, the company where he worked for 11 years. A short time after Heller was found dead, 58-year-old Gary Curtis, also a PSE&G employee, was found dead in his car of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Curtis is believed to have killed Russell Heller. So far, police do not have a motive in either of the killings. They don't have a suspect in one of the killings, and they believe both were targeted. Yet they are confident that neither of these Republican council members were targeted because they were council members or because they were Republicans. It is unclear how exactly police have ruled those out, what the evidence is. We know that Eunice Dwumfor was a devout Christian, and there is reportedly video of her speaking to her shooter just moments before she was killed, although we don't have the context. But to note, it is unusual to not have any motives and yet rule out potential motives. Tucker.
Fascinating. Trace Gallagher on every night, midnight Eastern on Fox. Thank you.
You bet.
As Trace just said, we have no idea what any of that means, but it's a little weird, no? It is. So is the fact that Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was rushed to the hospital yesterday. We don't have details on that either. Apparently he began, quote, feeling lightheaded. An MRI and other tests rule out a new stroke. They say Fetterman is still being monitored for signs of a seizure. So a lot of people lied. A lot of people, like the entire U.S. media, lied about John Fetterman's obvious medical problems in order to get him elected to the Senate. Here we are. Of course, we're wishing him the best. Don't wish him ill at all. But this may be the fruit of lying. Dr. Mark Siegel did not lie about this. Back in November, he pointed out that the likelihood Fetterman could have serious complications in office was very high.
Fetterman himself has said that his stroke was due to a blood clot from the heart. That is very significant. Greater than 60% chance that someone like Fetterman, with a heart in his condition, having had a stroke, will either have a recurrence or won't survive the term.
Dr. Mark Siegel joins us tonight for an update on this story. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on. I have to say, and with sorrow, because I just want to say again, I feel sorry for Senator Fetterman and hope he gets better, but you made the point that this was predictable.
Absolutely, Tucker. And though he's an inspiration to people with disabilities out there, we also wonder, is he up to the job? And especially now, you know, you showed my clip from earlier that I'm concerned about a repeat stroke, disabilities occurring, even not surviving 5 years. Now he goes into the hospital with lightheadedness reportedly. But I have to tell you, this country has a terrible history on both sides of the aisle of not telling us exactly what's happening with the health of our leaders. Now, I want to tell you medically, lightheadedness is not a sign of a stroke. Now, I understand that they're monitoring him, that they're observing him, that they've ruled ruled out a new stroke. We absolutely wish him well. But they're monitoring him for a seizure for a few days, and I want to give you a statistic, a study that shows a 5 to 7% chance of a seizure, convulsions, within 30 months following a stroke. And he's in that window. Does that mean I think he has a seizure? I hope he doesn't, but it points out something. He's got a bad heart. He has an irregular heartbeat. He had a bad stroke. He had through a blood clot. You know, he has a defibrillator and a pacemaker, and he's under tremendous stress. And anybody that's a U.S. senator is under tremendous stress. But the people of Pennsylvania, Tucker, have a right not just to root for his health, but to have somebody who's capable of serving them in the United States Senate, Tucker.
And have someone tell the truth. As you pointed out from the very beginning, just tell us the truth, and voters can assess. Dr. Mark Siegel.
We need to know the truth.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we certainly made a lot of fun of Don Lemon of CNN on this show, but tonight we have a sad report. Don Lemon appears to have had some kind of emotional breakdown on television, and it's ongoing. We'll have the tape next. We have spent many happy years making fun of Mr. Don Lemon of CNN, and at times we'll concede we've been a little cruel. But even as we have mocked him, and we have, there has been honestly an undercurrent of real affection. We kind of admire Don Lemon. How can a man so obviously limited have such boundless self-esteem? Doesn't he know he's an idiot? No, he has no idea. This is the guy who once suggested that a commercial airliner had been eaten by a black hole. And when people laughed at him, he seemed completely unbothered by their laughter. In a world of intellectual pretense, Don Lemon is not ashamed of being dumb, or for that matter, ashamed of anything else. When he got fired last year from his primetime gig for low ratings and reassigned to mornings, he told viewers it was a promotion, and he seemed to mean it. So whatever else you say about Mr. Don Lemon, he is unflappable, or so we assumed. It turns out there is, in fact, one thing that bothers Don Lemon, and that's not being the prettiest person on the set. That drives him insane. So possibly as a kind of torture, a kind of punishment, CNN's new president, Chris Licht, paired Don Lemon with two much younger, much more attractive co-hosts, Caitlin Collins and Poppy Harlow. And the normally steely Don Lemon began to melt down before our very eyes. The other day, for example, after Caitlin Collins interviewed a Republican member of Congress, Don Lemon launched into an attack on Republicans that wasn't actually an attack on Republicans, but a not-so-veiled attack on his co-host, Caitlin Collins. You can't do that. Producers in the control room turned up the music to get him to be quiet. We're going to commercial now. But he shushed them to keep attacking her. Watch this.
Thank you for taking time to join us.
Thank you for having me. All right. Thank you. That's going to be it. That's the time that we're in, where facts are sort of flexible.
That's why we got Caitlin Collins on the Hill, fact-checking in real time. It was a great interview.
Citing incredible sources, like citing the New York Post as a credible source and saying that facts are, it's just, I can't believe that we're here.
Caitlin, that was a great interview. All right, moving on.
Anyway, well, now moving on, because listen, that's a big issue when it comes to the American, hold on please with the music. That's a big issue when it comes to the American people. The American people are going to have to suffer through all of this stuff, from election deniers to people who don't believe in facts. We don't have a shared reality, and now it's taken center stage to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
This is Thanksgiving at the alcoholic passive-aggressive family's house. The American people, shrieks Don Lemon. The American people! Of course, it's not about the American people. It's definitely not about, quote, facts. Facts? No. It's about how Don Lemon feels about himself. CNN President Chris Licht really ought to sit down with this guy over a few mango White Claws and just let him know that just because somebody else is pretty doesn't mean that you're ugly. It's okay, Don. You're beautiful inside. Or something. Is it going to work? We don't know, but they got to try something. Don Lemon is on the brink. So the so-called pro-life Spider-Man Mason Deschamps just completed his most daring climb yet. We are mesmerized by these, and they're legitimately dangerous. On Tuesday morning, he free climbed, in other words, without ropes, the tallest building in Arizona, the 40-story Chase Tower in downtown Phoenix. The climb received much more media attention than many of his other climbs. He was arrested after getting to the top, as he often is, but he's out of jail now, and he joins us to explain why he once again risked his life. Mason Deschamps is the pro-life Spider-Man. Great to see you, Mason. Thank you for coming on tonight. Congratulations on surviving yet another. It's incredible. Well, tell us why you did this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tucker. I climb these buildings because I want to show people how to have faith over fear. Abortion is murder, and that's the truth. Yet so many people my age are scared to speak the truth. They're scared to offend, they're scared to lose friends, but we can't be scared. Abortion is just like climbing a skyscraper. It's a matter of life or death, and we don't have time for fear. That's why this time around, I'm raising money for a woman named Hope. She's 22 weeks pregnant, and she is partially disabled, and I want to show her that she doesn't need to have an abortion, and she doesn't need to live in fear.
Did you raise money by doing this?
Yeah, I raise money every time, especially by coming on your show, Tucker.
Well, I mean, it's just such an amazing story because, you know, on the one hand, your athletic ability and your bravery is just remarkable, and the fact that you're doing it in support of the single most unfashionable position in the United States of America, and you don't care, is even more inspiring, I would say. Have you talked to Hope?
I have personally not talked to Hope. She works with counselors, but I'm praying every day for her that she can receive the help and care. And I know that, like, what I do is risky, and I know what I do is dangerous, but it's something that needs to be done. And like I say, not everybody can climb a skyscraper, but everyone can speak out, and everyone can help save a baby at a time by going to letthemlive.org and helping Hope, receive the support and care that she needs.
Yeah, I mean, raising money for a woman who's pregnant and doesn't want to be, and you're trying to help her, I can't imagine anything more virtuous than that. You'll be attacked, but not in my house. Mason Deschamps, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
So Matt Walsh has worked pretty tirelessly and pretty effectively to expose what's actually going on with the trans agenda, which means horrific child mutilation surgeries. He's now pushing for a bill that would outlaw it in his home state. He joins us next with an update on where that is. We'll be right back. We were shocked, and probably most people were shocked, to learn that Vanderbilt Medical Center, which is a very well-respected hospital in Tennessee, is involved in the mutilation of children's genitals for profit. They brag about it on camera. Now, we know this because of Matt Walsh, who found the evidence. So yesterday, at a hearing in Tennessee, in the State House, Democrats are outraged not by the genital mutilation going on at Vanderbilt Medical Center, but they were mad at Matt Walsh. One Democrat, a man called John Ray Clemens, asked Walsh for his credentials. Here was Walsh's response.
Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education experience?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized. My experience in healthcare?
Your educational background. I'm just curious. You testified as to a lot of your own research. So I'm curious for what purpose you do that and what background you have to qualify you to speak to that.
Well, my background that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain and common sense, and I have a soul. And so, therefore, I think it's a really bad idea to chemically castrate children. That is my experience. Also, I did, now it's true, I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read, so I can read the data for myself, and that's exactly what I've done.
Representative Clemens, you're recognized. And for what purpose do you conduct your research and use this brain of yours?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized. I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated. That's one of the things I try to do.
What kind of soulless freak is John Ray Clemens who could sit there hearing all this stuff and take the side of the castrators of children? It's just beyond. But Matt Walsh is the villain. In another hearing, Walsh left another Tennessee lawmaker, this one called Caleb Hammer, completely speechless.
I'm just curious of your definition of if you feel like people are adults at 16 should.
Well, people are adults at 18, but actually your brain is not fully developed until you're 25. So we should be having a conversation about whether we should even be doing these surgeries to people at 18. But certainly before 18, it's absurd. I mean, do you think that a 16-year-old can meaningfully consent to having their body parts removed? Do you? No?
Oh, Caleb Hammer, another ghoul defending the indefensible, had no answer. God bless Matt Walsh for doing that. He's the host of the Matt Walsh Show, joins us now. Matt, thank you. It's so satisfying to watch. Boy, you expose these people as truly filthy people.
Yeah, I think. Well, they exposed themselves to it. I think most of all. And the interesting thing too is that I'm sitting there in the hearing. I was giving my view on this bill. I'm in favor of the bill to ban the mutilation of children. I'm giving my view as a taxpayer and a private citizen, not an author of the bill. So their really failed and embarrassing attempts to discredit me were not only humiliating for them, but also totally irrelevant, because even if you can prove that I'm a terrible guy, does that automatically make it okay to mutilate children then? Because that's what we're supposed to be talking about. But they don't want to talk about that because they know they can't defend their position. This is the position that Democrats and the left are constantly in on many issues, in particular on this one, where their position is something that is so unspeakably evil that they can't speak it. So you can defeat them in an argument simply by trying to get them to state their premise. They can't even state their premise. I mean, the Caleb Hemmer does believe that 16-year-olds can consent to having body parts removed, but he can't say that out loud because he knows how crazy it sounds, and so instead he just falls silent.
You look at someone like John Ray Clements, looks like sort of a normal person. Maybe he has kids. He's in favor of cutting the breasts off girls. I mean, how could anybody get to a place where that's okay?
I think, I can't see inside their minds, but I have to imagine that most of these people know at some level that it's wrong, but they're just ideologically beholden to it. That, again, is why they don't even attempt to defend it. And instead we get this credentialism thing going on, as if I need credentials to know that abusing children is wrong.
Well, as a Harvard-trained physician, I agree with you. It's wrong. Matt Walsh, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, a few years ago, 20 years ago or so, Carl's Jr., which fast food chain seemed to be on its way out, a man called Andy Puzder, who was a lawyer and had no experience running a big company like this, was chosen CEO and completely turned it around. An amazing story. How do you do it? He tells us straight ahead. Andy Puzder is one of the most successful business leaders in the country. He took over a huge fast food chain, Hardee's and Carl's Jr., made them very, very profitable. Then he retired. Then he noticed that something called ESG was completely distorting the American economy, and he decided to fight back against it. So we sat down with him for an hour for a new episode of Tucker Carlson Today. Here's part of it.
We're facing a group think on the left that's really metastasized almost into a religion. And they use things like climate change, like equity versus equity over equality. We're no longer talking about hiring people based on merit. We're now talking about hiring people based on diversity. Forget Martin Luther King's. We should judge people based on their character, their qualifications, their merit. We're now openly judging people on their race or their sex. This is a terrible trend in this country, and I think a lot of it descends from this ESG mentality that the left has been able to impose on us through control by these asset managers of American business, America's private sector.
It must be weird to see it happen in your world. So when you were in college, the radical left was on college campuses or at the sociology department at the state university or whatever, but they weren't running big companies. They certainly weren't asset managers.
No.
And you spent your life in this world. You must know a million other CEOs. And now a lot of them are infected with this brain virus.
Yeah, and you really kind of can't avoid at least publicly supporting it. Now, like I said, privately, I think the stakeholder capitalism thing isn't real. For example, Starbucks and Amazon, they signed. They're on that stakeholder capitalism, and one of the stakeholders is employees. So when their employees wanted to unionize, did they come out and say, you know what, we're stakeholder capitalists, our profits are going to go down, labor costs are going to go up, you're going to make less money, but we're really good guys? No, they fought unionization.
Of course, or we'll pay for your abortions, but not for your maternity leave.
That's right. So there's a lot of baloney that's kind of working through the system on this, but there is a real threat, and that's ESG investing and what these large asset managers are trying to impose on the American people, using American people's own money to implement these policies.
And not just big investors, but like people's pension funds and stuff.
Yeah, look, if you want to change the world, do it at the ballot box or do it with your own money.
Do it with your own money or by voting. Remember that? Democracy. Andy Puzder. The conversation is out right now on FoxNation.com. And tragically, we are out of time. We could go on. Libs of TikTok joins us tomorrow night to respond to some criticism from the Congress. State of the Union address last night. We do not blame you if you took a pass on that. Tuning in was a grim task. 80-year-old Joe Biden shuffling stiff-legged and bewildered to the podium, a husk held together by Botox and enough amphetamines from the White House doctor to read the slogans written for him by unelected Obama acolytes who actually run the government. This is our president, ladies and gentlemen. It's always pretty hard to believe when you see it. The whole scene is so awful, so degrading to our once proud country, it cannot end soon enough. But the moment was, we will confess, at times pretty amusing. At one point, the eminent TV doctor, Dr. Jill, who really ought to have her own show on Bravo dispensing sassy and empowering medical advice, walked over to Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, and kissed him deeply, square in the mouth without a mask, something that never ever happens at his house. What was that about? There was an unmistakable 1970s suburban Connecticut Tea Party vibe to it. Kind of a John Cheever story, old school stuff, except they let bystanders film the whole thing. So clearly these people are exhibitionists too. Not tea. There's a lot going on behind the scenes in the Biden administration, a lot of which we don't want to know more about. But where do these people find the time for hijinks? Dr. Jill, for example, is extremely, extremely busy, way busier than you are. According to her husband, Dr. Jill is working day and night to drag this country out of its medieval ignorance. And that's not an easy task. Watch.
Jill, my wife, who teaches full-time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us.
Wait a second. Dr. Jill is teaching, quote, full-time? How many hours a week is full-time? And where is this happening? What school or university or madrasa is she teaching at? What is she teaching? Can we sign up for her class? How come we didn't know any of this until last night? Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us, says Dr. Jill, and that's a fair point. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Bravo, Dr. Jill, bravo! The question is, how shall we as a nation respond to Dr. Jill's clarion call for action? Obviously, you need to shut down the schools for an entire year because unionized teachers feel like longer vacations, and then get rid of all standardized tests because racism. That's the solution. It turns out that Dr. Jill, who, like an awful lot of community college geniuses from Delaware who've received advanced degrees in, quote, education, she has an awful lot of good ideas. We ought to listen to her more. Unfortunately, we don't often get the chance because she's always teaching. So that really was the highlight of the evening, Dr. Jill making out with the vice president's husband, and then Joe Biden bragging about a job she doesn't actually have. Pretty hard not to find that funny. And then there was Biden himself. Now, the president's mental condition is either scary and depressing, deeply alarming, or absolutely hilarious, depending upon your mood. Last night, for lack of other entertainment options, we decided to find it funny. So take in this steaming pile of word puree and see if you can make sense of it.
As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracy has grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one.
We shot down their balloon. So name me a world leader who can decipher what Joe Biden just said. Name me one. See, you can't. Friends, democracy is winning tonight. Now, we have no idea what any of that means any more than Xi Jinping does, but the trained seals in the crowd loved it. They clapped consistent with their species. Actually, sorry, that is unfair to seals. There's not a seal in the ocean, or even at SeaWorld, who would wear an I love abortion pin. That is too low even for marine mammals. They may eat live fish, but they're not ghouls. Congressional Democrats, by contrast, are ghouls. Take a look at this pin, which has replaced the American flag on their lapels. Notice that the O in abortion is in the shape of a heart. They literally love abortion. Now, let's set aside the politics and ask an honest question. Who loves abortion? Honestly, who loves abortion? Maybe you think abortion should be legal, but do you love abortion? Do you think abortion is a wonderful, affirming act you feel so proud of? You brag about it with jewelry? If you feel that way, you should know that you are not defending a medical procedure. You wouldn't say that about an appendectomy. No. You are promoting an ancient religious rite called human sacrifice. That's what this is. promoting human sacrifice. Let's stop lying about it. It's very obvious now. And speaking of death cults, Joe Biden made his case last night for the sexual mutilation of children.
It's also passed the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity.
First, you want to say, whoa, whoa, pause, Mr. President. Define every letter in the acronym and what they all mean. Of course, he couldn't. But he is pointing to an occurring reality in our country. There are hospitals in the United States, hard as it is to believe, that are right now performing mastectomies on little girls in the name of gender ideology. They're castrating children and then giving them drugs that produce sterility and osteoporosis. And they're bragging about it. Now, this has happened with adults for a long time. It's never happened at scale with children, and no one's ever bragged about it. But the Democratic Party now is, not just endorsing it, not just supporting it silently, by calling it an affirmative good. Joe Biden, the guy who showered with his daughter, causing her to develop sexual compulsions as an adult, calls the sexual mutilation of children safety and dignity. That's dark, really dark. But it got worse, actually. The humor stopped and the darkness descended. Joe Biden proceeded to talk about the recent death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis. Now, you'll remember that he was killed by 5 police officers, all of whom were black, as was he. So the takeaway from that episode may be worth knowing about, but it has nothing to do with race, at least not directly. Everyone was the same color. And yet last night, Joe Biden used that sad episode with Tyree Nichols' family present in the room to advance the lie, the one you hear so often, that the white middle class is the single greatest threat to America, and especially to black people. Watch this.
Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car.
Now, it is fair that they don't worry like that in the Biden family. Both of Biden's surviving children have had run-ins with the police repeatedly. Hunter Biden left a crack pipe and his ID in a rental car, but no one ever followed up on it because he was the son of a powerful politician. Maybe Joe Biden should be grateful for that, but it's not a racial issue. But he's saying that it is. The police, African Americans, are trying to murder you because you're black. That's unifying the country. Police are responsible for all the violence in black communities. That's his message. Now, that is not only a lie, provably a lie, because reliable statistics exist. It's a lie that's caused a lot of people, including a lot of black Americans, to die over the last 3 years because police in many places have stopped enforcing the law and in others have simply quit, and they're replaced by total mediocrities and crazy violent people like the cops who beat Tyree Nichols to death in Memphis. How do you think they got that job? Because normal people quit. That's why. Because they didn't want to work in an industry that's under attack unfairly from the President of the United States. And now Joe Biden is repeating that lie. And on and on and on. At one point, he claimed January 6th was an active insurrection, and that it was an insurrectionist, not a hippie nudist with a BLM sign outside his home who attacked Paul Pelosi last year. Do you remember that?
The last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie, assailant unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th.
The insurrectionists. People who were justly upset because they felt that the 2020 election was not on the level, which it was not, by the way, which it was not. And we know that for a fact now that we've seen the Twitter files, which prove that the big tech companies took a side in that election, and we didn't have a free and fair election, certainly not a free press. But people who are upset about that are now insurrectionists. Nonviolent protesters are insurrectionists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the lies just kept coming. to the point where it was deeply frustrating to watch. At one point, Biden claimed that NATO was fighting against Putin's aggression, even though we now know, thanks to the Israeli prime minister, that it was NATO, the United States in other words, that prevented a truce from being signed between Russia and Ukraine last year. As Joe Biden said that, a lie, Mitch McConnell clapped and smiled wearing his Ukraine flag tie. But maybe the most egregious lie is one that affects every American. Biden claimed that our economy could not be doing better because he's an economic wizard. Watch this.
We're better positioned than any country on earth right now, but we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months.
So those were very specific claims about the economy, a lot of which is easy to measure. So we thought we would bring in someone who understands the economy, who's covered it for decades, and that would be Charlie Gasparino, a senior correspondent at Fox Business. He joins us now. Charlie, thanks so much for coming on. So let's just, if we could, stick to his claims about the economy. And they did seem specific. If you were just paying half attention, you would think, wow, he's got it under control. Were those accurate claims?
I mean, it's accurate that that stuff is coming down, like inflation is coming down. The question is, and jobs are going up. The question is, does he have any responsibility for it? And, you know, listen, I watched it. I fell asleep halfway through. I definitely read the entire speech. It's delusional in its grandiosity is the best way to put it. Listen, inflation, Ron Klain and Joe Biden don't control interest rates. The Federal Reserve does. And the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates to calm inflation. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden and Ron Klain and whoever's running things in the White House. Joe Biden and Ron Klain or whoever's running things in the White House caused inflation by spending gazillions of dollars that didn't need to be spent. We should point out that the economy was pretty damn good when he took over. He was handed not something like Obama was handed, which was the post-financial crisis economy. He was handed an improving economy and a waning pandemic. There is almost nothing that this guy did to improve the economy. As a matter of fact, he made it worse. The reason why his approval ratings are so lousy is because even though we have very low unemployment, the purchasing power of the average person, the working class or middle class American, has gone down because of inflation, and that's on his back. And it's not a great economy if you can work 40 hours a week. Yes, you got a good job, but guess what? You're spending much more money to put food on the table, put gas in your car, and that's the Joe Biden economy, and that's why you know he's lucky. My view, he's lucky that the Republicans can't find their way here. I mean, it's a mess in the Republican Party because he really is, on the record, based on the facts, a lousy president, particularly when it comes to the economy.
The worst of our lifetime. Meanwhile, Republicans are thinking about how to cut Social Security. Right. You got to think some of them secretly do work for the Democratic Party. It seems that way to me. What do I know?
They're behind the scenes. Maybe they like Joe Biden. Maybe they think he's a funny guy. By the way, what a nasty person last night.
I know.
I mean, could you get any nastier than that?
No. Vicious. Especially on your way. You're 80 years old.
Yeah.
Why not spread a little kindness? Try to unify the country, not demonize half of it.
Think about that. Unifying the country. What a novel concept.
Charlie Gasparino, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Type Tucker.
So for people living in this country, the drug crisis is of paramount concern. It's being driven by our open southern border, but its effects are everywhere. People have kids who are dying. Go to any city, there are people on their way to dying, lying on the street. So the fentanyl crisis, the drug crisis more broadly, but specifically the fentanyl crisis, should be really the whole speech. Biden, by contrast, mentioned it only briefly, took no responsibility for it, never even acknowledged that the open border has driven it. Here's what he did say.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it.
Yeah, what was that applause? But drug ODs are not the only consequence of the open border, though they're probably the biggest. In some places along the border, U.S. citizens are literally being forced to defend their property from people here illegally from foreign countries who show up on their land. And by the way, if you have a human right given by God defended hopefully by the U.S. government. It's the right to protect your family, your life, and your property from invaders. If someone shows up on your land and threatens you, you have a right to use deadly force, period. And if you don't have that right, you're a slave. So this played out in Arizona recently, where a 73-year-old rancher called George Allen Kelly shot an illegal migrant who was trespassing on his property and apparently threatening him. Now, that's legal under Arizona law. It's legal under natural law. And yet police have charged Kelly with first-degree murder. His bail is set at $1 million. By the way, he asked the judge, my wife is home alone. My elderly wife is unprotected in a place that's overrun with foreign nationals here illegally. Can you just let me out so I can protect her? No. What is this? Harmeet Dillon is the chairwoman of the Republican National Lawyers Association, and our friend, she joins us tonight. Harmeet, this seems pretty basic. If you don't have the right to defend your property from anyone threatening you, much less a non-citizen, like what right do you have?
Well, you're absolutely right, Tucker. And under Arizona law, it has a pretty broad law for protecting your property, standing your ground. And that includes the protection and the right to shoot somebody who's breaking into an unoccupied residential structure. So we don't know all the facts surrounding this circumstance, but the person in question who was shot was a repeat player in crossing the border. And the family in question has repeatedly been subjected to migrants crossing their property and presumably threatening them as well. And so hopefully when all the facts are known here, the individual will have a defensible argument to make to the jury about this, or the prosecution may be dropped. But this just highlights the fact that nowhere mentioned in the speech of the president last night was the human toll on American law-abiding citizens and even immigrant communities that are subjected to rampant unlawful immigration. And in fact, thousands of criminals coming across the border every day, threatening Americans and threatening residents of our country. And that tragedy is not just the drug tragedy, but in so many other ways, and it's permeating throughout the United States in a volume of new migrants to this country that in a 2-month period exceeds the population of some states. We talk about over 200,000 people a month right now in some recent months, and it's staggering. And you just heard the president lie about it yesterday. He minimized it first, but he said we've reduced illegal immigration from certain countries by 97%. He mentioned Cuba, Nicaragua, and a couple of others. The volume has not decreased at all. They've simply legalized it. And so that's how they decreased the illegal nature of that immigration. They simply moved it from one category to another and paroled people. But that's outrageous. That's an outrageous lie, and you don't really see the media calling him on it.
No, and they're committing a crime at scale, and no one says it. Harmeet Dillon, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So San Francisco, as you may have read, is about to vote on whether to give reparations to African Americans in San Francisco, in a state that never had slavery. But the meeting that will determine this has been delayed because one of the main people pushing for reparations wasn't there. He was too busy partying at a Hooters in Columbia. That's a real story. Not Columbia, South Carolina. The country, Columbia. That's how oppressed he is. Here's a story so perfect you think we made it up, but we didn't. The city of San Francisco has set up a commission to create a race-based spoils system called reparations in a state that never had slavery. The plan right now is to give $5 million to every California resident of a certain skin color. So that's humming along, speeding toward dystopia, but it has hit a snag. The latest meeting of the commission was scheduled for Tuesday and had to be postponed for more than a month. Why? Well, one member of the commission, San Francisco Supervisor Shaman Walton, could not make it because he was busy partying in Colombia, the country, and he missed his flight back to California. In photographs he uploaded from the local Hooters, it looks like he was having a lot of fun. Seems like that he's got a lot of privilege, not oppressed at all. But he's not backing down. Walton says as soon as he gets back from Hooters, he'll get back to work on those $5 million checks. And by the way, he'd said he would like his check in $1 bills for the Hooters girls. We made that part up, but the rest is real. So before the war in Ukraine even began, both Toria Nuland at the State Department, the #2 at the State Department, and Joe Biden threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Watch.
I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
So then the pipelines actually blew up. These are the pipelines that bring natural gas from Eastern Europe to Western Europe to keep the European economy going. And they exploded, causing the single largest human-caused environmental disaster in all of history. And again, setting Europe on the road to actual poverty. So it was an unpopular event, and Joe Biden denied any responsibility. In fact, he blamed Russia. Joe Biden and his whole administration told us that somehow Russia, for reasons they never made clear, just because they're evil, had sabotaged their own energy pipeline. Watch this.
It was a deliberate act of sabotage, and now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies.
So that was in September, and it was obvious from the very first day, well, that's not true. It's not that Vladimir Putin is too good a person to blow up Nord Stream, but like, why would he? It only hurts him. And by the way, it really hurts Western Europe. But a lot of media outlets repeated that lie dutifully. That's what they do, and attacked us as Putin stooges for having questions about it. Well, we know a lot more now. There have been a number of official investigations of what happened, and not one has found any evidence of Russian involvement. And now we have the actual answer to what happened. Oh, the Biden administration did it. For real. Investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, who's been around for more than 50 years, just wrote a piece on Substack that includes this, quote, last June, the Navy divers, U.S. Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Now, this piece continues. It's probably the most comprehensive news story you will read this year. Seymour Hersh on Substack, you should read it. And it recounts in detail meetings with the National Security Advisor at the White House, where this was planned, exactly what explosives were used, how they were triggered, by what aircraft, on what day. So many details in here that it is not possible that it's not true. It is true. And in fact, no one in the high level in the U.S. government is denying it with any specificity. Instead, the White House is just dismissing it as utterly false, and no reporters are following up on this. Amazing. Aaron Mate is following up on it. He's with the Gray Zone. He joins us tonight. Aaron, I don't remember the last time I saw a story this well reported. It wasn't in the New York Times, Hersh's former employer. They wouldn't have run it. But the fact that nobody at the White House briefing today even asked about this story makes me think we are becoming North Korea.
Tucker, this is a case where you have the motive. The U.S. has long been trying to stop the Nord Stream 2 because, as Cy Hersh's story points out, the U.S. has recognized that if Nord Stream 2 goes online, that would make it a lot more difficult for the U.S. to wage a proxy war against Russia, because Germany will not want to be on board with cutting off its source of cheap energy. So the U.S. found an answer to that problem. They blew it up. And it's interesting. Hersh reports that the planning for this operation began in late 2021. And that's when Russian forces were massing on the border of Ukraine, and there was a threat of the invasion. But something else happened. Russia, in that same month of December 2021, when planning was underway at the White House to blow up Nord Stream 2, Russia also submitted draft treaties to the U.S. and NATO, laying out detailed proposals for the U.S. and NATO to resolve their issues, to roll back NATO military infrastructure in states surrounding Russia. Now, we know what happened to that because the U.S. rejected it, wouldn't even discuss the core issue of Ukraine not joining NATO. Instead, the U.S. chose to basically let the Russian invasion happen, and then when that happened, proceeded to engage in this operation to blow up Nord Stream 2. And they've made no secret about their embrace of this. The day after the Nord Stream 2 was sabotaged, Antony Blinken declared that this was a tremendous strategic opportunity. And most recently, you've covered this, Victoria Nuland testified in Congress that she is grateful, along with the White House, that the Nord Stream 2 is now a hulk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
I mean, NATO is a coalition of European powers led by the United States. The United States just wrecked their economies I don't see how NATO stays together after this. I don't, but I mean, what do I know? Ermate, I hope you'll come back. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Lauren Southern is an author and a filmmaker, and some of her views are considered offensive by the neoliberals in charge of everything. For example, she thinks unrestricted illegal immigration probably not that good for your country. And because of that, big tech has decided to make it impossible for her to live in the West. Airbnb has refused to allow her to stay in any of its properties without explaining why. By the way, if you have a felony record, you could probably stay at an Airbnb. But now Airbnb has decided to take a close look at Lauren Southern's family. Because her parents are related to her by blood, the genetics are incriminating, and her parents are no longer allowed to stay at Airbnb, a common practice in North Korea. So we reached out to Airbnb and its head of public policy, former Obama official Jay Carney, and Airbnb claimed this was just a mistake. But of course it wasn't a mistake, because they explained that they were doing it because these people are close to Lauren Southern in their email. This is the company, by the way, that banned January 6th defendants. Lauren Southern remains banned by Airbnb. She joins us today. Lauren, thanks so much for coming on. So, I mean, what kind of world is it where not just the thought criminal, but the thought criminal's family is banned from spending the night? What is that?
There's definitely been a Pandora's box opened in the culture war. I think progressives have realized with the laws we have in place defending civil liberties, they can't quite bring a social credit system in yet, so they've found a way to circumvent it through the corporate class. They can just impose a social credit system on us using big tech.
Do you think your parents will be allowed to buy food or receive medical care since you're against illegal immigration?
In the next few years, who knows, honestly. This is escalating at such a rate I never could have expected. Of course, Airbnb have reversed their decision for now, claiming they are very sorry. But I think we both know the only thing they're sorry for is bad PR and that they were trending on Twitter last night.
Well, I mean, and they admitted it. In their communication to your parents, they said your connection to Lauren Southern makes you ineligible. So I wonder if you were like a convicted armed robber, would they do this to your parents? Of course, they would not even consider it, right?
They don't even treat the families of Epstein and Maxwell like this, right? And what was funny is when they reversed the decision, they claimed in an email to my parents that they had reviewed their appeal. My parents never appealed the decision. So they're attempting to create this phony narrative that it was all a mistake. How do you mistakenly track down an activist's family, mistakenly send them a specific email saying it is because of their relation to me? It makes no sense. They're trying to cover up something nefarious here. And the only reason they aren't continuing to do this to me is because I have a platform and they're testing the waters. If they got away with it this time, they would have kept going. But they miscalculated how woke their market is.
This shouldn't surprise us. These are the same people who attack entire groups of people on the basis of their genetics. Some groups are innocent, some are guilty. I mean, it's classic Nazi race science. You're implicated by your blood. I mean, that's what Airbnb is saying.
Essentially, yes. And I got to say, one of the most disappointing things for me is that it has gotten to this point, that we've spent so many years having Republicans defend cronyism by pretending it is capitalism, and then our failsafe, which was supposed to be progressives, who are supposed to question the big corporations when they are discriminatory, specifically on blood and genetics, they're like an ADHD dog that just got distracted by a bone with a pride flag on it and placated entirely. So we're left with just activists on Twitter. Thank goodness your show, you're really holding down the fort for conservatives who want to have their freedoms, but it's just a real shame.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, it's not hard. You shouldn't punish people's parents for thought crimes. I mean, it's like, yeah, that seems an easy one. Lauren Southern, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a lot of people claim that professional wrestling is fake. Well, how fake is it? We thought we would talk to an actual professional wrestler. In fact, one of the most famous, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and he respectfully disagrees. We talked to him for a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson today. Here's part of it.
Back then, you think it's fake? You come up in the ring with you, and we'll show you if it's fake or not. So he had to fight every local tough guy there is, you know, and of course that's the old joke. You're always a phony wrestler until you go to court. You go to court, you're just trained killer. It goes like that, 10, 20, 30,000. Every time you hit them, that lawsuit goes up. You know, they're like, I'm going to sue you. I said, I'm getting my money's worth. We're not done, brother.
So what were the guys? So this was, even though it was in the 70s, it wasn't in the 20s, but was really a different time, right?
Much different business. It was a really rough, tough, carnival-type business back then. People were marks. You try to work them out of their money. Now it's sports entertainment, international
What does that
business.
mean they were marks? You try to work them out of their money?
Well, yeah, like a carnival-type term. You know, people, you're trying to work them out of their money, get them to give you the money somehow, trying to work them out of their money. And that was never my idea. I said, I put on a performance. Those folks pay to come watch me perform.
Were you on the road?
I was on the road, yeah, an awful lot. That's one of the hard things about wrestling is the road, you know, especially back then in the old WWF, which was the golden age of wrestling. Hulk Hogan, Jake the Snake Roberts, Macho Man, Andre the Giant. Yeah, you would work all the time because you didn't have contracts. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. If you got hurt,
you didn't have a contract?
No. If you wrestled, you got paid. So if you were on top, like I was working with Andre the Giant, I knocked Andre out with my 2x4. We were on top. I worked with him 54 nights straight.
Later in that same interview, Hacksaw told us about how a home invader, unfortunately for him, showed up at his home and he detained the man using his .44. You can watch the whole interview with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, now on Fox Nation. Well, it was Joe Biden's State of the Union last night, technically, but somehow it was Dr. Jill and Kamala's spouse, the second gentleman, making out that stole the show. What is going on between those two? A forensic examination next. The other night we told you about Florida State University's so-called equity programs, which are, of course, the definition of racism. They discriminate against students on the basis of their skin color, something we had a civil rights movement in order to prevent, but that still takes place. The school awards racially segregated scholarships. White kids cannot get those scholarships. Chris Rufo broke that story. Now Florida State University realizes they have been caught violating the law and decency, and so they've corrected it, quote. The old language in the school's scholarship policy read this way, quote, applicants of the award must be minority students, African American, Hispanic, Asian, or Pacific Islander, Native American. The new language states that the scholarship is, quote, available for all new and currently enrolled graduate students, but that preference may be given to students who are, quote, historically underrepresented. Okay. They always beat you with passive aggression. They never fight you. They just change the words. What does that mean? It means they just move the words around. But they're still violating federal civil rights law. And civil rights law in Florida, the letter and the spirit of it, and decency. But somehow the Civil Rights Division is not interested at the Justice Department. I wonder why. We'll keep on it. Well, Joe Biden's State of the Union had a few awkward moments before it even began. Biden appeared to struggle to walk through the Congress to deliver the talk.
Hi. Sir, how are you feeling tonight? Feeling good. What's the State of the Union? Great shape. Getting better.
Then Dr. Jill and the first gentleman, Doug Emhoff, decided to do a key party of some kind. They started making out right before the speech. Steamy in a kind of celibate way. And then fussy old Mitt Romney had some stern words for the new Congressman George Santos. You're seeing that exchange on your screen right now. After the speech, Romney called Santos a sick puppy. Said Mitt Romney put a dog on the roof of his car and marched in a BLM rally. And an embarrassment, said Mitt Romney. Well, today, Santos, who we're starting to sympathize with, we got to be honest, responded to Mitt Romney. Watch.
It's not the first time in history that I've been told to shut up and go to the back of the room, especially by people who come from a privileged background. And it's not going to be the last, and I'm never going to shut up and go to the back of the room. And I think it's reprehensible that the senator would say such a thing to me in the demeaning way he said. It wasn't very Mormon of him. That's what I can tell you.
So he's playing the privilege card. Who should we root for here? Nobody. One of them. Jesse Kelly might know. He hosts the Jesse Kelly Show. He joins us now. So it's also great, of course. But who should we be rooting for?
Oh, I'm rooting for George Santos.
Yeah,
like you just pointed out, Tucker, George Santos might be a liar. He might even be a drag queen. I don't know what to believe at this point in time, but George Santos didn't march in a BLM rally just after St. George Floyd died in this country and whip up the narrative that helped burn down American cities and jack our murder rate through the roof. George Santos never did any of that. So if he wants to wear women's panties and put on lipstick, that's his business. Mitt Romney's the one who made my country worse.
Well, I think that's fair. And if you're going to have a fraud contest, and let's go ahead and do that, who's more fraudulent, George Santos or Mitt Romney? Who do you think would win?
Well, I think Mitt Romney is not only a huge fraud. Mitt Romney is one of these people who, this is common with the whole Bush era types. They never look in the mirror and realize that this next generation of ickies that they're always complaining about, they're the reason we have that next generation that's different. Their low-T GOP weakness allowed these communist pieces of trash to wreck our country, tear through everything. And now that there's a new breed that's a little rough around the edges sometimes, they get really uppity about it. Mitt Romney soiling his granny panties because George Santos attended the State of the Union is about the least important thing that I care about.
Well, it's such a fair point. I mean, if you ran everything and then, say, 2 years later, everything started to collapse, wouldn't you wonder if you were implicated in that collapse?
But they never do it, Tucker.